To start Finance Friday, we're going to hear about some government issues first because this affects all of us. From AHLA, please welcome Chip Rogers, and from AAHOA, Chirag, Shah.
Good morning, everybody. What better way to start your morning than to talk about your government? That generated no laughs.
That's rough.
Obviously, we have entered a new realm with the last election. Things have certainly changed in Washington, D.C., and actually changed in some state houses and governor's mansions across the country, and it's having an impact not only in our nation's capital, but in other places as well. We're going to talk about a little bit about those items today. Some of the things that we at AHLA are working on, some of the things that AAHOA is working on, and many of the things that we're working on together. Chirag?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's delightful to be out here, get the opportunity to share a panel with the head of the lodging industry now, but of course he spent so many great years with AAHOA, and so we're delighted that he built the government affairs operation within AAHOA, and so we've been able to really work closely together during his time with us, and of course now with AHLA. And if I had to describe one word about our working relationship with our good friends at the American Hotel and Lodging Association, I'd say it's synergy. A lot of synergies here between our two groups, and the issues that we're going to discuss today really describe what those issues are and how we're working for the entire lodging industry to promote that. So it'll be a good opportunity here.
First, let's talk about the national political outlook. There was a major change in 2016, and that was followed up by a major change in 2018. And I would say in my years, and there have been a lot of those years, and following politics, that we are at a very unique position, and that we have the White House and probably the leadership in the House of Representatives further apart than at any point in time that I can remember. And that has created a gridlock where not only can they not necessarily agree on issues, they can't afford to politically to agree on anything. In other words, Nancy Pelosi and her team can't really come out and agree with the president on anything because it really hurts their fundraising abilities and the people that are at the core of their party. On the Republican side, President Trump has a pretty high approval rating among Republicans, but they can't agree with anything that Pelosi and her team would support. So we're in a very tough spot.
Yeah, and I think that's really illustrated by the lay of the land politically. You've got 34 what are called crossover districts, and that means that you have 31 districts where President Trump won that district, but it is represented by a Democrat, and 3 districts that are reversed. And so taking difficult votes is something that nobody wants to do because they're going to upset their constituents at home or they're going to upset their national base. And on top of that, you have 6 senators plus at least 1 member of the House and several others, a couple of governors, a few former members of Congress that are running for president. And so everybody is very close. Everybody's watching their votes very closely to see how they're going to project on a national stage, and that makes governing very difficult.
And so in the next election, coming up in 2020, of course, there is the presidential election. That will garner almost all of the attention. But as you look at Congress, the House will most likely stay in the hands of the Democrats, though I expect, because of what you point out about the crossover districts, 31 of them being in districts that Trump won, that margin will get closer. So the House will become even more closely divided between Republicans and Democrats. So I think Pelosi and her team will hold on. In the Senate, it's interesting because this is really the key. There are about 6 races that you would consider those races will be competitive. You have to think about Alabama as almost certainly flipping back to the Republicans, which would take them to 54. So of those 6 races, 4 of them are held by Republicans, 2 by Democrats. The Democrats would, for the most part, have to sweep just about every one of those races to take control, and that's probably unlikely.
No, that's true. And again, every vote is being watched closely. In Maine, you have Senator Collins. There's been a lot of angst. She's very popular in Maine, but there's angst because of her vote on Judge Kavanaugh. In other parts of the country, in Colorado, folks are looking to try to flip that seat with Senator Gardner. And so you have a lot of races which will be very close, but a lot of it's going to depend on turnout, and a lot of it's going to depend also on the popularity of the president. And right now, he's hovering right around 45%. And so his impact on a variety of those races is going to be indicative, both in terms of the enthusiasm, but also the way that turnout happens. And so if he's able to have some strong coattails, then I think the Republicans will be all right. But you also see a national wave. You saw a little bit of a wave in 2018, which promoted a lot of Democrats in seats that they were not expected to win. We're not sure how long they'll be able to hold on to those seats. But as far as the president's approval rating, it's been fluctuating a little bit. You mentioned his popularity with Republicans. He's not going to gain a lot of popularity with Democrats because the campaign is essentially already started. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 2020, because right now, if you look at the economic indicators, the president should win in a landslide. And that's not just me saying that. That is a gentleman by the name of Ray Flair from Yale University, who did a comprehensive economic analysis study. I'm not sure if his friends call him the nature boy, but but the study was showing that the economic indicators, which we're going to get to here in a second, from unemployment to the real boom in the economy, should, historically speaking, ensure that the president wins by a wide margin. Almost 300 electoral votes, and the popular vote by almost 10 points. But there are other issues that will also determine, including perhaps some scandals and perhaps this investigation. So it'll be a unique election, to be sure.
I think the point of talking about what's happening at the national level is that most likely what you will see is that the House will stay in the hands of Democrats. Most likely the Senate will stay in the hands of Republicans. So yes, whoever gets elected president will have an impact, particularly on the judiciary, but they won't have that much of an impact if we have a divided Congress on the legislative process, which means we may be in for another 4 or 6, who knows how many years, of a stalemate at the federal level. And when that happens, a lot of the activity then begins to move to the states. And we've seen that happen in the last 2 years. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. I did want to point out on this slide here on economic growth, much of this is, as you indicated, very good news, but some of it can be tied to a major legislative victory that I know that everybody in this room was probably supporting, and clearly the industry was supporting, and that is the tax reform. Something that, for those of us who have sat on political panels for years, talked about as perhaps a dream that may never happen, and then in 2017, it actually did happen, and what we've seen since then is an economy that is about as strong as I've seen in my lifetime.
It has been a very interesting transition from a bill that was passed exclusively by Republicans. And one of the things I found particularly interesting was this was the signature initiative that they had a couple of years ago. And once it passed, they almost stopped talking about it. And it was something that, while the economy has been doing well, there's been a lot of description about the tax bill as something that has not necessarily benefited a lot of people. But we've seen that in the economic numbers are pretty significant. 50-year unemployment lows, 10-year high wage growth, and the one that's particularly interesting to me is gas prices, because for our industry, travel and tourism is up, especially domestic travel and tourism, because of those low gas prices. So there is an opportunity here, I think, to really continue to expand if the tax cuts that were brought forth in that program are made permanent, especially for small businesses. You saw a 21% rate drop or to 21% for corporate interests, and then a 20% small business deduction. So it was more of a hybrid approach to bring in both the large businesses and C Corps as well as the pass-throughs. But we've seen what that's done. This is the first year of filing, and we've seen that the savings are already working, especially for small businesses, and helping them to create new jobs, to reinvest in their businesses by capital improvements, expanding into new properties, wage and benefit production for their employees. So it's a very interesting time to see what happens with the economy.
And a question in many of these type of forums is, how long will the growth last in our industry? And I think actually, if you look at the first 3 numbers there, the one in the bottom right corner is the one that benefits from the first 3. And I talk about this a lot. If people are employed and very safe in their jobs, if their wages are going up, the one we don't have on here is the stock market, but if their 401k looks good, their retirement looks good, and the cost of travel, particularly with gasoline, is low, then guess what? They're going to travel, and that's what we're seeing. That these first three items here really help the fourth. So when we start this discussion, which I think happens at every conference that I've been to in the last 5 years, of when will the growth finally end, well, it will probably only end when those first three go a different direction. So yeah, low unemployment, wage growth, a healthy stock market, and low fuel costs really help our industry. So let's talk about one thing that is really struggling because the economy is so good, and that is labor and workforce. One of the Wake Forest, they're struggling as well. See, I knew you were awake. Where's Mitt? He may disagree with me on that. But because the economy is so good, the one thing that I hear across the country as the one major challenge that is universal to pretty much any part of the nation you're traveling to is a shortage of labor. And we talk a lot about extreme wages and the dangers that may come with governments going a little far in mandating the relationship between an employer and an employee. But one thing is for certain, right now, employers aren't talking too much about those wages. They just want to try to find good labor, and that's been very difficult.
It's the number one thing that we've heard from our members, from hoteliers across the country, is finding that sustainable workforce. And the great thing is for our industry, as you all know so well and so personally, is that it is a phenomenal story to tell, especially when you talk about the career opportunities for employees, and the ability to start off at an entry-level position and work their way up through every possible job within the industry to take on leadership roles and eventually even ownership roles. And that's a story we tell on Capitol Hill every day in state legislatures across the country. And it's a story that I think that we need to tell even more assertively so that folks know that lodging is not a particular type of job where you're just doing it to get by, but you're really making a career out of it. And it is an opportunity that we have to really be able to affect legislation. And when you start talking about some of the issues, a lot of times legislators don't know that the lodging industry is home to opportunities. And that's why when bad policy ends up happening that affects our industry, it's because they don't know that story. And some of the things that we've heard we've seen the detrimental effects, including the joint employer liability ruling that took place in 2015. We're still seeing the effects. It's really creating a challenge for hoteliers as individual owner-operators, as franchisees. It is creating a challenge for franchisors and brands because they're taking steps back from working closely with their franchisee partners. And so the National Labor Relations Board is looking at a rule. The Department of Labor is expected to release a rule shortly to ensure that those issues that you can create a clear distinction between who is an employer and you escape that liability because it really hurts our industry.
And one of the interesting things when you look at these items right here is that we often focus as an industry on what's happening in government and how they may be putting up hurdles to us having a continuing growth, but having an issue with labor, and certainly joint employer, the overtime rule that was proposed a few years ago, which has now been revised to a much more reasonable standard. Those are issues on the government side, but one of the interesting things that I love so much about this industry is what we are doing outside of what the government may dictate to us. At AHLA, we started a program last year called Hospitality is Working, and it really focuses in 3 areas, and one of those areas is opportunity youth. There is a group of young people that we're focusing on between the ages of 16 and 24 who are actually not in school and they're not in the workforce. And when you go into a lot of urban settings, this is a major concern for mayors and city councils around the country is what about this group of young people? And our industry is probably better suited than any other industry to take those young people, give them an opportunity to see a career where they may not see a career, because they've probably been told their whole life, look, if you're not graduating from high school, you have no chance. If you're not graduating from a 4-year college, you have no chance. But the reality is yeah, those are great things, and we certainly all encourage our own children to do those things. But in our industry, you have that opportunity through hard work, through a great attitude to move up. And so we're working in 6 cities this year with some community-based organizations where we see that population that needs some help. And we're investing about $500,000 in those 6 cities through our Opportunity Youth program to take those 16 to 24-year-olds, get them training, get them jobs in our industry, and then we begin tracking to see how they're doing. And so far, it's been working great. And that's an example of what our industry is doing that is proactively helping to solve this problem without having to go to the government for everything that we're looking for.
Yeah.
The next issue is one that has been a major challenge and frankly is only getting worse. As we talk about some of the things earlier in our presentation that are getting better, this one is going the wrong direction, and we've made some strides in addressing it, but as you can see by the numbers in front of you, if you are a hotel owner, the likelihood of you getting sued under the ADA from a predatory attorney is what I like to call them, is getting, that likelihood's getting higher.
Yeah, everybody in this room, I think, is familiar with the idea of drive-by lawsuits and click-by lawsuits. Folks either coming to your property and taking measurements, or in perhaps the worst cases, just blanketing a given city with lawsuits, and knowing they're going to be able to get quick settlements because it'll cost a hotelier as much or slightly more to defend it. As opposed to just quickly settling. And so we've seen this as a huge problem, even folks going just to Google Earth and taking a look at some pictures and filing a lawsuit. This has become an epidemic problem across the country. It started in states that had damage provisions under their state versions of the ADA. It has migrated as states have taken action in their legislatures. We've seen legislatures from California to Arizona to Florida to so many different places saying this is a huge problem for us, so we're going to pass laws. Congress has looked at it over the last several years, and there have been great strides in creating an opportunity to ensure that hoteliers have the chance to, hoteliers and other businesses, frankly, it's a small business issue, it's a large business issue. It is a huge problem of unscrupulous attorneys going in and trying to make a quick buck by extorting settlements from honest business owners. There are opportunities, I think, to be able to work with the disability rights community to broaden education and understanding within our own industry, but then also to work with them to create a safe harbor. So good, honest hoteliers that are working to provide excellent customer service to their members and to their guests. It provides them an opportunity to cure an issue that might happen or to find a safe harbor if they're able to do this. We saw over 10,000 of these Title III suits filed last year. I mean, it's become a cottage industry for these unscrupulous attorneys, and it gives all attorneys a bad name, and they already do a good job of that on their own.
Yeah, I remember talking to a hotelier in California recently, and this is how bad the situation is. And just so you know, if you haven't been a victim of this, you probably will, unfortunately. But the way that the shakedown works is they'll file hundreds of lawsuits at a time. They'll follow that up with a phone call, and they'll, in fact, sometimes they don't even file with a lawsuit. They'll just file a threat of a lawsuit. They'll follow it up with a phone call and say, look, for $5,000, $7,000, $8,000, we can make this go away. I was talking to a hotelier in California recently. He said he was the victim of this. He paid the ransom. And then a few months later, the same attorney filed another lawsuit against him and asked for the same amount of money again. So even when you think you're doing the right thing and settling something that you may not even be guilty of violating, these unscrupulous attorneys, as you describe them, will come back for more. Yeah. And you got to, at some point, you've got to put these bad people out of business.
Yeah. And it really is an outrage. Some of these attorneys are so lazy that they will file blanket suits, serial cases, and they won't even change the title. One of the examples we had was a hotelier was sued, and we were looking through the documents, and the hotel name was at the top of many of the pages, but as I started going through the middle of it, the person forgot to do a copy-paste job and started referring to it as Kevin's Tires. Apparently Kevin's Tires was also sued by the same attorney. So they're lazy, and they're just looking for a quick payday, and there's an opportunity here, I think, for our industry to get together with the disability rights community to say, we need to serve our guests in the best possible way. The way to do that is to stop these lawsuits.
Next issue, this is one where we've had some success. I think that certainly this issue has been discussed in this type of forum for a long time. Now we are beginning to win this battle, and really, ultimately, the message is very simple. No one in this industry is afraid of competition. In fact, as you look around this room, I would imagine most of the people in here compete with people probably sitting at your own table. The reality is that this is a highly competitive industry. But where you have a highly competitive industry, which is a good, healthy thing, you've got to have rules that apply equally to everyone. And as we've been saying for many years, those involved in the short-term rental business don't play by those same rules. But the good news is, as you can see on this screen here, there have been some major victories. Miami, Austin, San Diego, the entire state of Massachusetts, along with even further restrictions in the city of Boston. And there was a major court victory last week in the Ninth Circuit out in a case involving the city of Santa Monica. So we're seeing the short-term rental turn in our favor, but as you can see by this map, yes, some major victories, a long way to go. We need to make sure that in our industry that there aren't a lot of rules and regulations, but that those that exist apply equally to all. And if you act like a hotel, you operate like a hotel, you acquire other businesses that have hotel in the name, if you know what I mean, then you probably are in the hotel business. And we need to make sure that everyone is playing by the same rule, because the only thing that will make our industry survive is good, healthy competition where the rules are equally applied to all.
Leveling the playing field is so critical. Recently, AHLA filed suit against the Florida Department of Revenue in order to level that playing field because they entered into a voluntary collection agreement with Airbnb. I don't know any hotelier that can choose in a volunteer capacity to pay his or her taxes, and so it is somewhat mind-boggling that government is going out there and creating the thumb on their scale on a scale when it comes to Airbnb. But we think there's an opportunity, these great wins, and I think those wins will continue to mount.
Yeah, you mentioned something, Chirag, about the idea that a taxpayer could just submit whatever they wanted without the threat or there being any investigation into whether those numbers are correct. And we would all love to just send the IRS what we think we owe them and not have to worry about them doing an audit. That would be a great place to be as a taxpayer. The situation in Florida, as you indicated with the lawsuit there, is so bad. I actually read the documents, and they're publicly available now, so I'm not divulging anything that you can't find yourself. This is it's an amazing situation. When the state of Florida agreed with Airbnb on their, quote, voluntary compliance to pay their taxes, one of the parts of this agreement said that if there is a FOIA request, which for those who aren't involved in FOIA requests, that means that somebody asks the government to turn over information. If there's a FOIA request in Florida that involves Airbnb, the state is required to notify Airbnb before they even respond to it. I have never seen that in any state. How do you strike that type of a deal? And that's what you saw a few years ago when Airbnb was going around the country saying, hey, we'll voluntarily pay some taxes if you just don't audit us and if you let us know if anyone's looking into our business. Next issue, OTAs and distribution policy. This one is becoming more and more of a concern. It's a big issue. As the OTA world, most everyone in here knows, is really two major companies. It would be nice to have some more competition there. But the distribution policy that we see now, where you have situations on OTAs where you have strike-throughs on prices that perhaps never existed. There's a lot of what I would call consumer deception happening, not just on websites that perhaps aren't real, but consumer deception on actual websites where they're giving false and misleading information. We saw Europe recently address this, and this is becoming increasingly a bigger problem here in the United States as we now see the ability for someone to purchase a hotel room night going through a limited number of channels. Human trafficking. I will let you lead off on this one, and this is perhaps legislatively at the state level, the biggest issue, the hottest issue that we're facing.
Human trafficking prevention is a moral imperative that we have as an industry, of course, because we know that there's privacy inherent within lodging. Folks come to a hotel and they expect privacy, and they are granted privacy, and whether you're a law-abiding citizen, whether you're a criminal engaging in nefarious activities, the staff, there's no way that the staff could know absolutely what is going on. And as an industry, we've seen this for many, many years. For a decade, couple of decades, across the industry, from the brands to the associations to individual owners and management companies, folks have undertaken to stop human trafficking to the best extent possible within our industry, because no one wants that criminal element taking place on their property, but specifically they want to be a part of the solution in saving lives. And from an industry, we've taken on a great deal of that responsibility. Within AAHOA, we've partnered with multiple different organizations, from the Department of Homeland Security and their Blue campaign to create and work with their hospitality toolkit to provide information and resources to hotel staff and hoteliers across the country, Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking, and Polaris, where we've created certification programs where hoteliers can go on and go through an interactive module and show that they are certified in human trafficking prevention. But the challenges that we've seen, and here in Georgia, we've joined the Georgia Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force to help law enforcement and victims' rights groups to raise awareness within hotels. But what we're seeing is that even through all of the good work that we as an industry have done, we've not engaged in tremendous self-promotion. And that's become a problem where legislatures, from the federal level to state legislatures to city councils, are looking at saying, hey, we should do something to regulate the industry, even though we undertook this without government coming in. And there are a lot of big challenges that might happen as a result, and some we're already seeing.
Yeah, that has become increasingly the problem. I know it is a frustrating situation for law enforcement. They see something that they want to solve. But unfortunately, some of the focus that we are seeing in places, including here in the state of Georgia, is that instead of going after the criminals, those people that are actively engaged in human trafficking, instead they're going after property owners, which really makes no sense, because I know of no property owner who wants human trafficking involved in their property. Nobody wants that. But we are now seeing, and this is where we have to be somewhat vigilant, is the idea that you could prosecute a property owner, in this case a hotel owner, who may have no knowledge whatsoever of criminal activity happening on his or her property. And that is kind of the way that law enforcement is looking at that. Let's go after the property owners, and that's a very dangerous thing. I think as an industry, we've actually taken the right steps, and that is, how do we train our employees to see the criminals that may be around us? And these people, make no mistake, are criminals. How do we go after the people that are actually involved in committing the crime? And it is through training. We have seen that training is the most effective way. We certainly know that Marriott has trained hundreds of thousands of people now, and they should be commended for that. And this entire industry should say thank you to every one of these organizations that's leading the way on this. G6 has a very robust training program. In fact, just about every brand is now actively engaged in making sure that they are training their employees. And it didn't take a government mandate to do this. We knew it was the right thing to do. But as you indicated, we've got to do a better job, and everyone in this room can certainly help with this. Let's do a better job of telling the world that our industry realizes this is a major issue, and that we are taking the steps to do the right thing, and we can be a leader among other industries to help follow us in this.
And we recommend, if those are the folks in the room, if you've not taken one of these training programs personally, please do so. Please encourage every one of your employees, whether they're guest-facing or not, to take this training program. It will help immensely, first and foremost, to save lives, but secondly, to protect your businesses. We've seen criminal liability that is being entertained, as well as the opportunity for the right of private action against a hotel if they haven't done these sorts of things. We're seeing a tremendous number of issues that could come up. And a quick hat tip to our friends at the Georgia Hotel and Lodging Association. We just saw a bill passed in the House yesterday, and appreciate all the efforts that y'all have done working on that issue as well. So there's just a variety of things that can be done to protect our businesses, but first and foremost to save lives.
Yeah, and I guess the moral of it all is let's all do the right thing as an industry, and we'll solve this problem. Travel and tourism, great news. More people stayed in a hotel last year than at any year in our nation's history. More good news is that it looks like 2018 will have more international visitors than any point in the history of the United States. One challenge is that in the global marketplace, our global share has decreased. So while the actual numbers of people coming to the United States has increased, more people around the globe are traveling, and our market share has somewhat decreased.
There's some great programs that we're looking at to be able to recapture some of that market share. Brand USA, I'm sure many of you are extremely familiar with this program. It's a public-private partnership to market the United States as a destination for international visitors. We're optimistic that there's going to be a renewal of this program with tremendous bipartisan support. Visa reform to allow countries to bring more people to the United States through a visa process that is much more efficient. And the national parks. When you're looking at national parks, folks come from across the country, but certainly domestic travelers go to national parks, and one of the challenges that we've seen is a $12 billion backlog in terms of the infrastructure in those national parks. And so Congress is looking at a bill to really bridge that gap on national parks infrastructure. And so there are great opportunities to bring even more people to stay in your hotels and to really boost the economy.
Questions? The clock tells us we have 90 seconds to go. Any questions? It's hard to see up here, but well, look, first, thanks for being up early this morning. I know after the Wyndham party last night, it was probably difficult for everyone to get up this early to hear us talk about government, but it is important. As I mentioned in just about every speech that I give on this topic, no one believes that government's getting smaller and less intrusive in our lives. If the recent elections don't prove that, and some of the policy initiatives that you see happening in Congress, where people are actually talking about getting rid of airplanes and cars and cows, and strangely enough, those type of proposals are actually treated as legitimate public policy discussions today. The notion that government is not getting larger is something that's foreign, because we know that it's becoming more intrusive in our lives and more intrusive in our businesses. And how do we, here in the last 30 seconds, how do we combat that? Well, you've got to get actively engaged. If you think that you can stand on the sidelines and not participate, and that our industry will just be fine because we're good guys and good girls, that's not going to happen. You see that happening all across the country. You see that happening in Washington, D.C. If the powers that be sometimes have their way without us telling our story, things could get very bad for our industry. So those numbers that we see where everything's been going good, it's interesting, because I look at some of the people that we work with on a daily basis. There's a lot of young people in the workforce today that have never experienced a true recession. And they're not fun, and I don't want to go through one again anytime soon, but public policy dictates a lot of that. So getting involved in the AHOA PAC, getting involved in Hotel PAC, combined last year, I think the two PACs raised last term, about $3.3 million during that cycle. That was historically the most ever. But that pales in comparison to some of the money that's being raised by the people on the other side. So we've got to be engaged. We've got to invest in our industry. And when we do that, we've got the best story to tell. We're on the right side of the issues, and we have the story of the American dream and American opportunity, but that voice can only be amplified through our access to lawmakers.
Yeah. And I'd echo that as well. The best way to get involved is to get to know your lawmakers, and mark your calendars right now, September 10th and 11th in Washington, D.C., the joint AHOA, AHLA, LAS Legislative Action Summit. For a number of years now, we've joined forces to bring over 500 hoteliers and hotel industry professionals to share our story. It is such a remarkable story of jobs, job creation, economic development in local communities, and our leaders need to hear that story. Participating in your local state lodging associations and going to the state capitol, meeting with your local officials, it's critically important. And as Chip mentioned, the Political Action Committee. Political Action Committee, whether it's AHOA or AHLA or the state associations, make sure you get involved to support those endeavors, because the only way we're going to ensure that officials who support our industry remain in office is if we're able to support them. So we appreciate everybody's time today and your rapt attention about government. But there are some really fearful ideas that folks are looking to bring to our industry. And the only way we can share that story about how well our industry is doing is if we explain to them its critical importance on the economy.
Thank you.
Thank you.